All right, we got a great guest for you guys now. Reza Aslan, he's the winner of a James Joyce Award, which is huge. He's the author of 3 internationally best-selling books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. There's a huge controversy around his CNN show, Believer. He's got a podcast, Metaphysical Milkshake, and now a new book, An American Martyr in Persia, The Epic Life and Tragic Death of Howard Baskerville. Reza, welcome back, brother.
Thank you, it's great to be back on the show.
All right, so tell me about our old friend Baskerville.
Yeah, Howard Baskerville was a 22-year-old Christian missionary from North Platte, Nebraska, who in 1907 went to Iran, it was called Persia back then, in order to teach English and preach the gospel. And he showed up in the midst of the Middle East's first democratic revolution, the revolution that history will come to know as the Persian Constitutional Revolution. And this kid, it took a while, it took about 1.5 years for him to kind of be activated, but ultimately he gave up his missionary post, he gave up his teaching job, he abandoned his American citizenship, and he joined that revolution and fought alongside Persians against the villainous, tyrannical Shah for Persian democracy at the time, and he ended up dying this kind of incredible heroic death that made him a martyr and a real sort of inspiration for the revolutionaries who ended up actually defeating that Shah, sending him into exile and creating for a very, very brief while the Middle East's first constitutional monarchy.
Yeah, and so first of all, now you, as my daughter says, you spoiled the beans. Now I know he died. He goes in 1907. I thought maybe he's still hanging around, figuring things out.
You know, unfortunately, the subtitle kind of gives it away.
Yeah, kind of. Like when you put tragic death in the title of the book, it's just kind of a dead giveaway, if you will. But okay, so first of all, why did he have to renounce his American citizenship?
Well, at the time, the US government was aggressively neutral in the Persian Constitutional Revolution. In fact, the State Department had sent a memo to the missionaries in Persia explicitly warning them that they can have nothing to do with this conflict at all, that it's not their business, that the US government cannot support a revolution that is bound to fail, which is what the State Department said. And that more importantly, that there has never been in history a successful example of a democracy in a Muslim majority state. In fact, the exact line was, quote, "Islam implies autocracy." And so therefore, no American can have anything to do with this. And so when this one American actually did begin to fight alongside the revolutionaries, took actually a command position in this revolution, not only was he warned to stop, but he was actually threatened with treason. That was the argument that the American government made, that you are going against US interests, therefore we sort of consider what you're doing to be an act of treason. And Baskerville, in a very dramatic moment on the battlefield, handed over his passport and essentially said, okay, well, then I guess I'm not American anymore, because what it means to me to be an American is to fight for the basic rights of other people. You know, you may think that democracy is just a Christian thing, but I don't think so. And he did, he handed over his passport and essentially gave up his American citizenship and his privilege as an American in order to fight this fight.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same, and that's why history is interesting. I mean, just yesterday on the Young Turks, Dennis Prager was a guest, and he claimed that the Palestinians cannot govern themselves because they would choose someone he doesn't want them to choose.
Exactly.
And how dare they?
That's the problem with democracy, right?
Yeah, and if we're being honest, Barack Obama during the Egyptian Revolution for a long time stayed neutral. And I remember I was on MSNBC and he gave a speech about how the Egyptian Revolution was inspiring and that Hosni Mubarak was a great ally of ours.
Yeah, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I was like, wait, those are two contradictory statements. So we've been at this quite a while, America, in not believing that perhaps Muslim countries can govern themselves.
I'm really glad that you're bringing this up, because to me the biggest sort of takeaway, the lesson to be learned from Baskerville's incredible life, a life that has been completely lost to most Americans. I mean, this young kid for generations was a hero and a martyr in Iran. His grave is still there in Tabriz. There's a giant golden bust of him in a museum next to a big painting of him. He is, really until the 1979 revolution, he was considered Iran's Lafayette, is how he was often referred to, the foreigner who fought in our revolution. But in America, this kid is absolutely unknown. This is the first biography ever written about him. And I think part of the reason has to do precisely with kind of what you are saying, and I think honestly, like the lesson for me about Baskerville today is that, we as Americans especially have a responsibility and an obligation to actually make sure that the freedoms that we take for granted here, freedoms that are absolutely under attack in the United States, are freedoms that are universal. We talk a great talk in America, right? But it's rare to actually walk the walk. And this is a kid who 116 years ago not only walked the walk, but paid for it with his life.
Yeah, we've done thousands of stories on the Young Turks, but one of the ones that always stayed with me was when Joe Scarborough, now maybe a decade ago, I don't remember now, but said about Muslims in the Middle East. He said, they hate us because they hate us. They hate us because they hate us. They hate us because they hate us. He said it 3 times, okay? But Reza, they didn't hate Baskerville, right? And he was an American. Isn't that interesting? They have a golden bust of an American in Iran. So maybe they don't hate us just because they hate us.
No, and on that point, I think one of the reasons why I do want to make sure that Americans remember this kid, that this heroic kid, is because I really do think that he can be a kind of bridge, especially now. Look, at the governments of Iran and the United States, there's no way that they're gonna get along. There's no connection there. There's just too much animosity. But people to people, this, the Iranian people and the American people have so much in common with each other. And I think that there's an enormous amount of frustration and disappointment in Iran, not just at American foreign policy and the lack of support that America gives to Iranian civil rights organizations, but also that Americans themselves seem to just not really care, what's happening in Iran. They have this kind of cartoonish impression of Iran that Iranians don't share about America, by the way. And maybe in a way, it might be too much to ask, but a kid like Howard Baskerville in both countries can act as a model for a new kind of relationship, a relationship based on not mutual animosity, but mutual respect.
So Reza, let me float a theory by you. So I think that the Iranians have a more complicated view of Americans and understand that we vary and we're nuanced and we're different, right? Because they've seen American shows and movies, and there's rich characters in there that disagree, that have different points of view, and are real human beings. Whereas our media portrays only one vision of Iran. And it is not complicated, it is not nuanced, it is not real, it's just the boogeyman. What do you think about my theory?
I think that's right. I would actually add one more thing about it. I think that the vast majority of Iranians do not support their government, and they know that their government doesn't speak for them. So when their government does these horrible things, whether domestically or on the global stage, the Iranian people understand the vacuum, the distance between their hopes, their desires, and their government. They don't think their government represents them. But I think Americans, because we think we live in a democracy and that our government represents us and it speaks for us. And even when we don't agree with the government, it's still our government. It's still, our leaders. And so we just assume that in Iran, that people feel the same way about their government, that the government represents the people. Whereas Iranians would never think that the US government represents the US people. Like, it doesn't occur to them, right? They look at Trump or they look at Bush or whatever, and they're like, these idiots clearly don't speak for the American people in the same way that our idiots don't speak for us. We need to sort of have that same mentality about the difference between the Iranian people and the Iranian government.
Okay, one more theory, and I'm coming up with these on the spot, but I like them. Okay, so I think that that American media and American political actors presenting Iran as the Iranian people as liking their oppressive government, it has an element of bigotry in it, and here's why: because we don't present North Korea as loving Kim Jong-un. So we understand that there are dictators in the world and that they oppress their own people. So we never present Kim Jong-un that way. We might present him in other ways, although Trump said he loves him. But normally we don't, everybody else says Kim Jong-un is terrible, but he obviously does not represent the North Koreans. He oppresses the North Koreans. But when it comes to Iran, oh no, the Muslims love being oppressed by an autocratic dictator, etc.
Yeah, in fact, I'll take it one step further. Rarely do you hear politicians calling about a military invasion of Korea. Let's just bomb, all of Korea. Let's just kill, millions of people, in order to deal with the problems that we have with the government. That is standard talking points on the left and frankly on the right. On the right and frankly on the left is what I meant to say. About Iran. Let's just bomb them. Let's just kill millions of people. And that's the way that we can change the regime. And you're right. I mean, there is an element of racism involved in a lot of that rhetoric.
Yeah. Look, I had planned to ask you all about the history of the Shahs and the revolution that you wrote about and what happened after the revolution, but all of a sudden we're out of time. But there is good news for the audience. You get the book, and the book has a whole story. Okay, and it's
a great book, and I'm really proud of it. It's the best book I think I've ever written, and this is a kid that needs to be known. His story has to be told.
And it's told in An American Martyr in Persia: The Epic Life and Tragic Death of Howard Baskerville. Reza, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.